Big Rob grunted, Billy Tremont, and hauled hard on the joint, decimating it to a smoldering ember between his thick fingers. Yeah, him. Billy Tremont. He was a hack who worked the night shift, and I'll tell you something, he was just as dirty as they come. Fucking guy wasn't just on the take, he was the take, you know what I'm saying? He was as much a gangster as any of the boys in here. He controlled what came into the pen, and when, and who got it and how much they got. The dude squeezed out whatever competition he had from the other cops that were playing the game, by any means available. He set him up to get fired, paid to have him shit kicked by the bikers, you name it. He was a complete fucking asshole, but he was also real good at getting you what you wanted, for a price. Well, it's a fact that people love a mystery, especially people who ain't got fuck all to do with their time. A few guys pooled together some cash, and they came to Billy. 'Cause if anyone could find the answers to their questions, Billy Tremont could. Billy laughed and tells them that he'd love to take their money, but he couldn't do what they were asking. He says, the weird little bastard didn't have no file, as far as I can tell. I don't know who he was, why he came here, or where he came from. No one does. And that's the goddamn truth. The guys called him a bullshitter and Billy got serious on him. He narrowed his eyes and said to him, "You guys don't think I tried to find out for myself already? Huh, as far as I can tell, the kid just sort of popped up into the fish tank out of thin air. Looks to me like everyone just kept processing him along because no one wanted to admit that they didn't know who the fucking kid was. Call me a liar again, and I'll beat the fear of God into you." It was clear that they weren't going to get anywhere with Billy, so the guys, "What kid? Wait a minute, man. Which one's the kid?" Richie's eyes looked like black, bottomless pools. I remember that. He had already sunk deep into the mindless tar pit of addiction by then. He was past the point of no return. You could see it in his eyes. "Shut up, dummy." Rob turned to Mikey and made a gesture that said, "Please, continue." Mikey gave a rich, cold stare, then said, "So the guys gave up and said fuck it then, and that's that for a while. Life goes on. Then a day comes when Billy sidles up to one of the cons when he's standing in the morning chow line and tells him that he'd found some information on the fish, if anyone still cared to know. Billy was looking bad, they said. He looked tired and scared. That night, Billy comes to see this guy in his cell after lights out. He asks the guy for a smoke, and Billy had quit smoking years ago. Billy says to him, "I don't want any money for this. Keep your lousy fucking money. I don't want to be the only one that can't sleep at night is all. You pieces of shit got him into my head, and I couldn't get him out. Fuck you for doing that. Fuck you people sideways." The guy said that Billy Tremont's hands were shaking so fucking bad that he could hardly get his smoke lit. Billy tells the con that curiosity had been eating him fucking alive, so he spent some time thinking on how to go about getting what he wanted. Then he picked his mark. Billy always had his ear to the ground. You know the type. He knew this and that, who did what and where and why. He knew stuff about people. He knew that one of the suits in the office had a bad coke habit, the kind of raging habit that most people can't afford for long. He also knew that the suit and the warden were both banging the same chick, the warden's secretary. Billy gave him a 1/4 ounce of good raw cocaine and told him what he wanted. He promised to shoot the guy an 8-ball on top of what he already gave him, if the guy could deliver the goods. The suit came back to him a few days later with the sniffles and a file folder that looked older than the Bible. It was made out of some kind of rough, crumbling old cardboard, dry as dust. The office stiff says that the warden's secretary told him where to find it, locked up in a cabinet in the warden's office. He'd said that he'd put himself in all kinds of danger to get it, and he wanted more than a ball for his troubles. He wanted more than a quarter, too. Billy told him that he could either take the ball, or Billy could let the warden know that one of his minions wasn't just a cokehead and a thief, but he was dipping his wick into the warden's honeypot, too. Billy told the suit that the ass fucking the warden would give him wouldn't be anywhere near as bad as the one the wolves would deliver. So the guy shut his yap, took his 8-ball, and they parted ways. So, in between drags of his smoke, Billy tells the con that the first documents in the folder were pages taken from a court transcript. Some backwater courthouse sitting way out in cow country. They were handwritten with an old-time pen, Billy said. You know, the kind that you had to dip in a fucking inkwell, then pat dry against a blotter so the shit didn't smear. That's how old the thing was. All the dates and the kid's name were scribbled out, Billy said, but he figured that the first documents in the folder were from the late 1800s. Nick snorted. What? Is that even possible? Mikey shrugged. It is what it is, Nicky. The transcripts said that the kid had been charged with multiple murders, practicing satanic rites, cannibalism, arson, mayhem, and he was only 16 years old when they tried him. The prosecutor wanted to hang him for his crimes, but the defense lawyer that the Crown had appointed, some greasy little fucker, he argued it would be godly to let the kid live out the rest of his days in jail, seeing as how the kid was known to be an orphaned vagrant who raised himself in the woods. No moral guidance in the woods. That was the argument. The jury ended up getting all the pious, and they commuted the kid's date with the rope to a life sentence. They shipped him off to the clink, and that very first night, he killed his cellmate. Killed him with his nails and teeth, and then ate the poor son of a bitch. Coltrane looked disturbed. Holy fuck, this is horror movie stuff. I'm sorry, but you guys have got to be shitting us. Mikey shrugged again. Kinda wish I was, but I'm not. Not according to Billy Tremont, anyway. Billy said that they stuck the kid in a loony bin for the criminally insane after he ate his celly, put him in a straitjacket. At some point, the quacks realized that the usual treatments weren't working for shit, so they decided to give the kid a lobotomy. He was out like a light from the ether, and they were just getting ready to start, when the kid suddenly breaks his arm restraints and sinks his teeth into the lead surgeon's throat, just like a goddamn wolf. Ripped it right out. There is no way that he should have still been conscious, let alone being able to snap those thick bands of leather. But he was. And he did. Way I heard it, Hutch said. After he killed the quack, they put the kid back on the stand, and this time he got 12 votes for death. They took him to the town square and marched the kid up to the gallows, with all the townspeople screaming and throwing moldy bread and cow shit at him. He was laughing at him. The hangman put the rope around his neck and asked the kid if he has any last repentant words to share with the crowd. The kid says, loud and clear, "There's nothing to repent in doing what you want. I'd fuck your mother's ass and fry up her heart if I wanted to. And after I was done picking my teeth, I wouldn't so much as fart her a blessing. Why should I?" So the cops beat the kid with their clubs a bit, put the hood on the little fucker, and the hangman pulls the lever, but the trapdoor wouldn't open. He fiddled with it and tried it 3 more times, and each time the fucking door wouldn't swing open. They didn't know what to do. All the while, the kid was laughing and cursing at them and praising the devil, just being a general pain in the ass. People were screaming for him to swing. It was getting ugly out there, and fast. So someone gets the bright idea that they could just put the kid up against a wall and shoot him and be done with it. Only that didn't work either, Mikey added. His words were becoming thick and slurred. It sounded like the hooch was starting to do the trick. They put the kid up against a brick wall, and 5 cops took aim. 5 cops pulled the trigger, and 5 guns misfired. They tried once more, and the same shit happened again. By now, the people watching were getting spooked. The crowd of farmers and mill workers who came out to watch the kid hang, they all suddenly had places to go. Everyone left, and the Lord's Prayer was on more than a few sets of lips as they went, I bet. When everyone was gone, the cops packed the kid back into the wagon because there was nothing else they could do. They took him back to the courthouse, and, after some debating behind closed doors, the judge had sent him to a different jail, where he was locked up in an unused room in the basement. Then they boarded up the door, and then, for good measure, they bricked the whole thing over. Richie attempted to focus his eyes up at Mikey and asked, Can they really do that, man? Just put someone in a hole and brick the fucker over?" Nick spoke up. His voice was hoarse. "Maybe not these days, but we're talking back when a lot of people didn't even have a birth certificate. Sure, they could have done that. Who'd ever know?" He lit another joint and passed it. "So, what, man? They just left the crazy little fucker to die?" Richie appeared to be in the grip of a dubious species of moral outrage. "Another good question, Richie. Maybe you haven't killed every single brain cell yet after all." Mikey slugged back some more of that noxious hooch and grimaced. Billy Tremont said that there was only 2 other documents in the folder. An extremely fucking old mugshot, and a report to the Board of Corrections from a sanitation engineer. It was written sometime in the 50s. He'd been down in the old basement of the very same prison where they walled up the kid. He was down there checking out the shit pipes. It didn't have fuck all to do with what he was looking for, but the engineer mentioned in his report that he found a bricked over doorway down there. Curiosity got the better of him, and he tore away the crumbling old brick with a crowbar, pried the boards off, and popped the door open. Do you know what he found? A skeleton, Richie muttered. He was struggling to keep his eyes from sliding shut. No, nothing. That's what he found. When he forced the door open, the room was empty. We all took a few moments to digest this. "And then Bulldog ate his gun. Don't forget about that," Hutch rumbled. He handed the J back over to Nicky. Nick curled his lips in disgust. "Who slobbered on this shit?" he demanded. "It's wet as fuck. Gross, man. Fucking gross." No one owned up to the deed. Nick started to bitch about it some more, and Hutch gave him that look. The one that said, "Shut up immediately or regret it." Nick shut up. Mikey snickered. "Thank you kindly, Hutch. And Nicky, come on, kiddo. Just pinch off the wet part and stop your bitching. Anyhow, that fucking prick Bulldog. He was one of the least loved hacks in the entire history of the joint. A real, genuine, dyed-in-the-wool piece of shit. He was still a few years south of retiring when this all happened. Late 50s, I'd say. A huge, fat, red-faced motherfucker he was. Meaner than fuck. His blood pressure was right off the scale all the time. There wasn't nothing he liked better than to find an excuse to smash some unfortunate bastard upside his head. He'd do it with a sock full of quarters he kept hanging on his belt. When you heard the jingling of the change, you straightened up and you stopped fucking around until it was gone. If that nasty old fuck was in a mood, well, you steered clear and you kept your big yapper shut. So they put this fucking guy on watch in front of the kid's cell, doing the graveyard shift, right? He was all alone too, no partner or nothing. I guess the other hacks didn't like the fat mouthy fuck either. There he was, night after night, just him and this creepy fucking kid, all night long. Normally, this wouldn't have been very good for the con being watched. Being alone with a tired, grumpy Bulldog. And no witness, it would have been a long, long season in hell for most cons. But the fish wasn't the usual white boy dummy we get in here. You know what I mean? Like a kid got mixed up with something stupid, then wasn't rich enough to buy his way out of it. Not this fish. He was something else entirely. Mikey paused to force down a big glurt of Pruno, and Hutch jumped in. Well, old Bulldog only lasted about a month before he goes to his shift supervisor and requests to be taken off the watch. The head screw's office door was open a bit, and some dude named, Tags or Rags, or some shit like that, I can't remember. Anyway, he supposedly overheard most of the conversation while he was waiting to see the warden. Why was he waiting to see the warden? Richie mumbled. As per usual with Richie, he really wasn't getting the main focus of the story. Fucking ratting on someone, right? Fucking goof. I hate those fuckers. Rats need to get hurt, bro. Fucking rats need to get... Jesus, Richie. Go on the knot or something, would ya? You're a waste of skin. Hutch looked dangerously displeased. Richie grinned a big, goony grin and whispered, Fucking rats, though. Hutch frowned at him thunderously, then continued. So tags or rags or whatever, here's Bulldog say that he wants off the watch. His boss asks him why, and he won't say. Just that he's tired and he doesn't like watching the kid. Boss asks if he wants a partner, and Bulldog says nope, he just wants off the goddamn watch and that's that. So the head screw huffs and puffs and blows him off. He gives Bulldog some shitty speech about not wanting to abruptly change everyone's schedule for one fucking guy, and how if he did do that, little Johnny wouldn't get to see his daddy up in the fucking stands at his next baseball game, and it would fuck him up for life. You know, guilting the fat prick, and all that sort of thing. Then he tells Bulldog no, and sends him on his way. So Bulldog went home, and he drank most of a bottle of whiskey. Then he stuck his service pistol in his mouth, and he pulled the trigger. Nicky roached the allegedly slobbered-on joint and blew out a tremendous lungful of smoke. There was no way that the smell of the dank wasn't rolling through the whole goddamn pod by then. But none of us were concerned about it. If everyone was behaving themselves, the COs would leave us to our vices in peace. The situation was volatile enough already. Mikey piped up and said, It's a sad fucking thing, you know. When one of us string ourselves up or gets his hands on a razor blade, no one gives a fuck. The hacks laugh at you because your bowels let go and you fucking shit yourself when you died, and that's your obituary. Life goes on, and no one gives you a second thought. But this asshole sticks a gun in his yappa and blows his brains out the top of his head, and hell, suddenly he's a hero. There was even a big article in the local paper about how the stress of being a corrections officer causes depression, and blah blah blah. Sensitive souls can't handle the gritty reality of working with drugged out, ass-fucking convicts. It was kinda laughable, really. Whoever wrote that article didn't know Bulldog personally, that's for sure. Hutch interjected, but the fucking newspaper didn't mention nothing about what actually drove the piggy to pull the trigger and ventilate his own skull. Fuck no. No mention of the kid at all. The kid was the warden's nasty little secret, because they still don't know who the fuck the kid was or where he came from. And one way or another, the creepy little bastard was making people dead. All they had to go on was an old court document that read like a horror book. A passing mention in a sanitation report, and a black and white picture of someone who looked like the kid, but couldn't possibly be the kid. I was suddenly aware that I was getting a bit freaked out. In the soft red gloom, stoned out of my tree, every word that Mikey and Hutch uttered seemed frighteningly plausible. I cleared my throat and announced, I gotta tell you guys, this is a fucked up story. I'm getting creeped out down here. Hutch blinked down at me with inebriated surprise. Shit, I forgot you were even down there. Quiet little fucker, ain't he? More bubbly in your cup, my friend? I still hadn't managed to finish my first helping of the vile stuff. I shook my head and finished up Nicky's doobie instead. Mikey lapsed into silence, and we were silent with him, even Richie. In the silence, something dawned on me. I said, Hey, Mikey, when they brought the kid to a different jail and walled him up, after they couldn't execute him, that was this place, wasn't it? When you guys first saw him, he wasn't a new fish at all. The kid was the oldest con in the entire joint. This one's pretty smart, Mikey, Hutch said. Compared to Richie, he's a fucking scholar. We should make him our treasurer or something. What do you think? We ain't got no treasure here, old man. Not in this fucking shithole. Mikey poured himself another shot of the eye-watering concoction in the bag. Yeah, you got her, buddy. According to Billy Tremont, it was right underneath this very building. He let out a raspy sigh and hoisted aloft his Dixie cup of hooch. "To Billy Tremont," he said, "I sincerely hope God took it easy on you." "How'd he die?" Nick asked, and Mikey flashed that humorless smile again. "Not long after Bulldog ate some lead, we woke up to the sound of gunshots in the middle of the night again. They found Billy Tremont dead in the CO's locker room. His brains and bits of skull were sliding down the wall beside his body like snails." The coroner declared that it was another suicide, but here's the thing. They found 5 chunks of lead embedded in a wall, at chest height, and one in his brains. There was a full cup of coffee spilled on the floor beside him, and he still had a vacation request form clutched in his free hand. Mikey leaned back against the wall and let out a scornful gust of air. "So according to the official report, here's Billy sipping on a fresh coffee, just about to go to the office and request some vacation time, when suddenly, right then and there, with no warning or reason, he decides to shoot himself. But before he does that, he fires all the bullets in his service pistol into the wall, except for the one that he fires through his own temple. That's a hell of an odd way to commit suicide, don't you think?" Nick looked disturbed. "The kid came for him. That's what happened, isn't it?" He appeared very young and very vulnerable in the dim crimson light, his face unlined and guileless. "It got out of its cell and it was coming for him. The cop tried to shoot, then turned the gun on himself before he could get at him." "Can't say for sure, Nicky. The only guy who can is 13 years in his grave." Remy tentatively cleared his throat from the top bunk. "You said something to Hutch about the power going out before, and something that happened when it did. What were you talking about?" "Nah, maybe we shouldn't get into that tonight." "Hell, might as well tell him the rest," Hutch rumbled. "Gone this far, haven't we?" A week after Billy bit the dust, a storm rolled in and knocked the power out clear across the country. We were all herded into our cells and told to shut up and fucking behave. A lot of the hacks couldn't make it into work that night, on account of the roads being all fucked up with accidents and torrential rain and shit, so the bosses who did make it to work were all carrying heavy firepower. They made it clear that they weren't going to fuck around if someone got out of hand. Right around midnight, I heard a shotgun go off somewhere on the other side of the pen. Can't mistake that sound if you're familiar to it. I was wide awake and on my feet in a heartbeat. Then, sort of muffled and far away, I heard screaming. There was a boss standing nearby my cell, and over his radio a voice was squawking. He's out of his cell and he killed Amesley. He's ripping everyone apart. Get your asses over to solitary now." The hack took off running and I turned to Johnny Franzini, but he stole the words right out of my mouth. He said, "The boy, he is loose. This is bad." It was dark in there, but I'm pretty sure I saw Johnny cross himself. Mikey's eyes glittered at us in the semi-darkness, glassy from the drink and wide from the memory on his lips. There was a second gunshot, and then a whole lot more. They echoed and boomed and scared us shitless. When they tapered off, we heard more screaming. It sounded like animals at a slaughterhouse, squealing and buckling while they breathed their last. Me and my cellie, we fucking hid in the corner with a mattress in front of us. We didn't know what was happening. Just that the hacks had tried to shoot something and they didn't fucking succeed. I'm not afraid to admit it. I was shitting my pants. I heard feet come slapping against the cement, and then 3 hacks sprinted past our cell. They weren't just running, they were fucking sprinting, hauling ass like Olympians. I seen their faces for a second, and they were wild with fear. I've never seen anyone look like that, before or since. Everyone was hollering at them as they passed, asking them what the fuck was going on. They didn't answer, didn't even hear us. They just ran on by and kept going. After a few minutes, a 4th guy comes along and he's limping real bad, using his rifle as a crutch. He got left behind, I guess. The hack was looking over his shoulder a lot and sort of jog hopping as fast as he could manage. He was leaving a trail of blood behind him. The hack's uniform was shredded and torn on one side of his body, flapping around like rags. I yelled at him, "Hey, what the fuck happened to you guys? What's going on?" And he stopped in front of our cell. I could see the guy a little better now, and I wish I hadn't. It was Ainsley. He wasn't dead after all, at least, not yet. His right arm had been shredded to almost nothing. I mean, it was just a few flapping pieces of meat and stringy shit, oozing blood and barely holding the bones together. His right thigh was missing huge chunks of meat too, and most of the foot. The guy's face was gray from blood loss. His eyes were like a doll's, like twin pieces of round, murky glass. He was in shock. He moved his mouth, trying to find some words, then said, "I think I'm dying." Then he started hopping again. There was a puddle of blood on the floor where he had stopped. "Okay, that's enough," Remy said, and his voice quavered a little. "I don't want to hear any more." "I don't remember asking if you did," Mikey rasped. Remy pursed his painted lips and was silent. Hutch continued. "I heard something else coming then. It sounded like something running on all fours, something with claws. I backed up against the wall, as far away as I could go, and Johnny cowered down into his bunk with his blanket pulled up around his face. It came in fast and ripped past my cell, just a fucking blur of arms and legs, and about 10 seconds later, I hear Ainsley start wailing like a siren. It was awful. Those were death screams, man. Nothing else can force a living creature to let out such awful fucking sounds. It took me a moment to understand that Ainsley wasn't just screaming. He was saying something. He was saying, "Mommy, it's eating me! Mommy, it's eating me!" Then I realized that I was screaming right along with him. So was Johnny. The whole pod was screaming. You remember that, Mikey? All of us, 200 murderers and stick-up men, fucking screaming in unison like little girls. I won't ever forget that. Not ever, Mikey said, quietly. The hack finally stopped making noise, and we all did too. You could almost taste the terror in the air, sharp and bitter. I could smell Ainsley's blood, that coppery smell that gets into your throat and makes you want to retch. It was so quiet, silent as a tomb. You could have heard a pin drop. And then, slowly, so slowly, a figure comes strolling into view on the range. It was the kid. He was red from head to toe, completely covered in blood and guts and shreds of stuff that kept sliding off him and dropping onto the floor. He wandered right down the middle of the range, and he was carrying Ainsley's head by the hair, dangling beside his leg as he walked. I watched him as he passed and I didn't breathe. Not once did I even fucking dare to breathe. The kid ambles on up to the hack shack, just as casual as can be, and he puts Ainsley's severed head up on the ledge of the window. Then he walked out into the middle of the range, raised his arm, and pointed at all of us, each individual cell, like he was marking us, each and every one, marking us for death. When he was done, the kid just walked back the way he came, and he disappeared from view. That was the last anyone ever saw of him. He was just gone. There was a full minute of silence. Finally, I spoke up. Why the fuck did I never hear anything about this before? How? This should have been everywhere. The news, TV crime shows, fucking everywhere. Nick chimed in and said, I never heard nothing about this either, and I used to love those fucking crime shows. No, you never heard nothing about that. But you might have heard something about a prison riot, Mikey said. According to the newspapers, the cons took advantage of the power outage and went apeshit for a few hours. Most of the guards on duty died trying to stop us, or so the story goes. The government funded a swell new electronic locking system, all because of what happened that night. I thought about this for a moment, then said, I don't know. What don't you know, huh? I'll fucking tell you the rest. How's that? Hutch glared down at me, and his narrow eyes slammed phantom punches into my face. I froze. The 3 hacks that we seen running for their lives, they ran right into the arms of the SWAT team who'd just gotten onto the scene with their guns drawn. The cops busted through the gate and they found what was left of Ainsley first. They ignored our hollering and followed the blood trail. They found the rest of them in the hallway that runs down the middle of Solitary, lying in a raw heap with the blood congealing in a pool beneath their bodies like gravy. All the cell doors had been ripped away from their hinges, and the cons inside had been torn into pieces. From what I heard, it took a crime scene cleanup crew 6 days to clean out that wing, and even after that, the cons and the hacks were finding dried up bits of flesh and bone for months on end. We told you what happened, and you can believe it or not, I don't give a fuck and neither does Mikey. Ask around if you wanna. There's some long-timers here that might talk about it, if you give them something to loosen their lips. Once again, I don't give a fuck. This whole pod had nightmares for a long, long time. I'm probably gonna have them till the day I die, and I doubt I'm the only one. There is something within these fucking walls that looks human, but isn't. It's something that you don't want to meet, and believe me, you better hope you never do. Hutch stopped talking then, and as the hour was late and we were all pretty fucked up, the silence soon turned to sleep. I recall dreaming of a fair-haired young man who stood amongst us as we slept, silent as a shadow. His eyes were completely black in the feeble glow of the emergency lights. His expression vulpine and hungry. I remember that, in the dream, I was very, very afraid that the boy would sense that I was not actually asleep. If he discovered that I was awake, he'd devour me. I remember this quite clearly. We awoke early in the morning to the pitiful sounds of a junk-sick Richie, dry heaving into the toilet. The lights were back on, and the lockdown was over. Richie wasn't the only one who was feeling like shit that morning. We were all in pretty rough shape, especially us floor folk. Sleeping in a sitting position on cold concrete makes for a stiff, painful morning. None of us had much to say. We all sat and smoked and waited for the hacks to do morning head count. I wondered if pounding hangovers weren't the only reason for that. I suspected that I wasn't the only one whose sleep had been disrupted by the fair-haired specter. A thing that should have ceased to walk the earth years before, but had not. A thing with a terrible appetite. The cops finally came around and let us out of our cages. They pointedly did not perform morning cell check. If they had, there simply wouldn't have been enough cells in Solitary to confine all the rule breakers. We all trooped off to stand in the chow line, except Richie, who opted to stay behind and, undoubtedly, indulge in a snort or two. And that's pretty much where this story ends. Well, almost. I was released a year early for good behavior. During the rest of my time there, most of Mikey's crew were paroled either through the front door or the back. Richie was the first one to get wheeled out the back way. Then, 8 months later, Coltrane's skull was pounded into a new and messy format, and he followed Richie out the back door. 6 months before I was uncaged, Big Rob Hutch had a heart attack while walking up the stairs that led to the tier above ours. He fell backwards, clutching his chest, and was dead before he somersaulted over the last few steps and landed on the bottom. So, for a while it was just me, Mikey, Nick, and a few casual homeboys. It got boring. The crew unraveled at the seams, and by the time I was paroled, it had ceased to exist. A few months after my divorce was finalized, I got nostalgic one night and decided to try and find Mikey online. Soon enough, I did. Through his obituary. He died in hospital of a short illness not long after I was released. Remy was also deceased, the victim of a shower room rape and stabbing. And Nicky? Well, I discovered that he was in a mental institution. I visited him in there once. I'd rather be in jail any day. Most of the patients I saw there were zombies, chemically bitch-slapped into subservience by their meds. There were a few others who were just strange. Their gaze made me feel unstable. And for Christ's sakes, I did time in a federal penitentiary. I was shown to where Nicky sat by himself at a table, and he instantly recognized me. We greeted each other like old friends and made small talk, just like anyone would. He seemed completely normal to me. I didn't understand why he was in there. Until I mentioned Hutch. "What do you think happened to Hutch exactly?" I asked him. And his relaxed grin suddenly became a twisted grimace of fear. He seized me by the front of my jacket and hauled me close. And his eyes burned bright with the fire of insanity. He hissed, "The kid pushed him down the stairs. It wasn't a fucking heart attack, that's a cover-up. The kid got Mikey too. It ate everything but his head. It left his head on his fucking pillow." The orderlies grabbed Nicky and pried him off of me, and they dragged him away while he screamed and flailed and twisted in their iron grip. I watched this with an open mouth and my heart pounding. Then I went home and got very, very drunk. Somewhere within those prison walls, there is a thing that hungers, and sometimes it feeds. I don't expect you to believe this any more than I did. But you know what? On nights like this, with the wind howling and the fine hair standing up on my neck, I couldn't care less what you believe. And if you were ever unfortunate enough to meet him face to face, well, I'll bet the kid wouldn't care what you believe either.